This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello and welcome back to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today is episode 26 and I am talking to Barry Hutchison, who very kindly came and did this podcast last minute for me. Now I wanted to do something to help in the what I am calling the Corona Gate situation. So we are talking about how to bootstrap your marketing and publishing, which basically I'm hoping that for anybody who has financial concerns because of what's happening with Corona, I am hoping that this episode will be super helpful, or just for anybody who wants to spend less on their marketing. But first, to last week's question. I asked, how do you network? Melissa Green said, I network on social media. I'm on most platforms and I also use Zoom. Sarah Louise said, great podcast, Sasha. I started reading Networking for Authors, which is by last week's guest, Daniel Parsons, on my journey home from the SPF live show back in March, and I wish I'd discovered it before I went. I really enjoyed the book, which is packed full of handy tips and useful info written in a light-hearted way, with Dan Parsons sharing his experiences and insights, invaluable reading for any introvert. Tony Harrison said, I've attended several conferences here in California and to that end have formed several friendships with other writers. Tim Seabrook said, another total introvert and unlikely to be travelling anywhere to network for the foreseeable future. Shay said, answer, I don't, and thus I shall be listening to this episode first thing in the morning. Thank you to everybody who takes the time to answer my weekly question. I really do appreciate it. This week's question is, what is your best free or cheap marketing tip? The book recommendation this week actually comes from somebody else. It comes from past guest Karen Ferreira, who recommended Swearing is Good for You by Emma Byrne. I cannot wait to read this book. As soon as she posted it in my Facebook group, I immediately went and bought it. It looks like a scream, and I might even try and pitch Emma after I have read the book, and maybe she will be on this podcast. But for those of you sweary lovers out there, I think this book is going to be perfect, and thank you to Karen for the recommendation. And as always, I will leave links in the show notes to that book. So in personal update, last week felt particularly hard. It was the fourth week for the UK to be in lockdown, and I didn't really get as much done as I wanted to, or it didn't feel like I did. However, the Anatomy of Prose paperback pre-order went live, which is fantastic. So the pre-order for the ebook and the paperback are now live, and I am starting to get some fantastic reviews back in. So if you haven't pre-ordered your copy yet and you would like to improve your prose, I highly recommend you pre-order a copy. This week I will be getting the hardback proof. I am also releasing a hardback with this one. So I'm literally about to order that this evening. What else? The workbook has come back from the editor, so I will be putting the paperback pre-order live hopefully this week for that one. Yes, I've also written an article on how to breathe life into your prose using the touch sense, which is on Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi's Writers Helping Writers website, where I'm a resident writing coach. So if you would like to breathe a bit more life into your prose, then I will leave a link to that in the show notes. And also it is a bit of a glimpse at prose, the Anatomy of Prose, as I did take a couple of sections from that and then build the article around it. So it will give you a bit of a sneak peek at the Anatomy of Prose. Last, I was also a guest on First Editing's podcast, where I was talking about how to go full-time as a writer. So if you would like to listen to that interview, I will leave a link in the show notes as well. Now, for today's very large announcement, I am super excited to announce that I am launching another podcast. I know, I know. I always say how busy I am and blah, blah, blah. But this is going to be epic, and it's completely different to this one as well. So the podcast is called Next Level Authors, and it's launching on the 21st of April, which, as I record on Sunday, Sunday the 19th of April, is in a couple of days' time. But by the time you're listening to this live on Wednesday, it will have launched yesterday. So you can get that in your podcatchers. And so let me start again. So I am hosting this with Dan Wilcox, who was guest, I think, on episode 2, talking about collaboration. Now, this podcast is a podcast for all creative achievers out there. Each week, we'll be questioning each other and pushing each other to take our writing businesses to the next level. Listen in as we share the successes, tips, tricks, and mistakes that we make on our way to the next level. I mentioned that this podcast is going to work a little differently, and that is definitely the case. First of all, we're recording video, so you will get to see us in all our either glory or, hot mess situation each week. We will be putting the videos on YouTube, and the podcast, just the audio, will go through normal podcast channels. Each week, the episodes will be less than half an hour. Our aim is to be short, sharp and sweet with these. One question, kind of topic or theme of the week, and where we pick each other's brains, and then we will have to do some kind of task by the following Friday or whenever we record, or else there will be forfeits. Each episode will go live on Tuesday mornings in the UK. And to celebrate, we are launching with not 1 but 3 full episodes and a short intro episode as well. So if you would like to listen to the Next Level Authors podcast, I will leave links to both the YouTube, the podcast RSS feed, and also the Facebook group that is associated to that. Listener Rebel of the Week this week is Tim Seabrook. The company that Tim worked for in the UK restructured their business again, and unfortunately Tim was made redundant, but they kept him waiting around for almost 8 months until the replacement was up and running. The candidate that they selected seemingly had a perfect CV and was an expert on all of the systems, including things like Excel and Access and SAP. This person was hired, given a car, and paid more money. So Tim's rebellion was to only train him on bespoke areas that he wouldn't know, ensuring that all new work requests went to him, and he returned to his contracted hours instead of doing 60 to 80 hour weeks for the first time in over a decade. However, they rapidly discovered that this new candidate's Excel skills were average, and this new chap who was taking over Tim's job thought that Tim would continue to do the work for him when he buggered off and gallivanted away from the office. Both he and they were wrong, and the manager and the new candidate were left scrambling when Tim did his job and not the new candidate's job, and basically they realised they hired the wrong guy. So well done, Tim. I love that you got vengeance and this new candidate got comeuppance. I love a little cheeky work rebellion there. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your stories. I love reading them, and I am actually starting to get low again on rebellious stories. You can email me any kind of rebellion, big, small or otherwise. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, then email your story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or tweet me at rebelauthorpod. No new patrons this week, but I would like to say a huge thank you to all of my current patrons who are helping to ensure that this podcast continues. If you would like to support the show and get access to all of the bonus essays, posts, content, hear exclusive news from me before anybody else, then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting www.patreon.com/Sasha Black. That's Sasha with a C and not an S. I had some sound recording issues with this episode, so I am sorry the sound quality isn't as good as normal, but it should be back to normal next week. Okay, let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome back to the Rebel Author podcast. Today I am with Barry Hutchison. Barry is an award-winning children's author who moved into the indie publishing for grown-ups in 2016. He is the author of the Space Team sci-fi comedy series and, under the name J.D. Kirk, the #1 Amazon best-selling DCI Jack Logan crime fiction series. Hello and welcome.
Thanks very much. What a lovely introduction.
Well, thank you very much. So we met quite a while ago now. I remember meeting you, I think it was at Runnymede.
Yeah, London. London, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. And you were hilariously funny in your presentation.
Well, thanks very much.
And so I wanted to bring you on today to talk about something that you've talking about talking about. Christ, God, this.
It's not even early in the morning.
I know.
It's afternoon now.
I know. I haven't had coffee though, in my defence, and also I have a 6-year-old, and I didn't go to sleep until 1. Anyway, so I have heard you talk about this a couple of times, and I think now more than ever with the lockdown that we are facing and the global health crisis, I know that lots and lots of people are worried about money, about their business cash flow, and so I asked you to come on to talk about bootstrapping your marketing. But before we get into that, could you tell everybody a little bit more about your writing journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, no problem at all. I've wanted to be an author since I was 9 years old. I was in my local library. I used to go into the library a lot and ask the librarian for books on certain topics. So I would say, I want a book about aliens, and she would find me a book about aliens. And one day I went in and I asked her for a book about ninjas. I was going through a phase where I was obsessed with ninjas. And she said, I don't have any books about ninjas. And I was devastated that the library had let me down. And she said, hang on a minute. And she went through the back and she came through with a notebook and a pen. And she said, write a book about ninjas. So I wrote this terrible story about ninjas. I showed her it. It took me kind of a few days to write. I showed her it. And to her immense credit, she not only read it, but she wrote my name on the spine of the book, or the notebook, and she put it on the shelf next to the other books. And in movies when the clouds part and you get that heavenly chord, and that's what it felt like. And I realised that that's what I wanted to do, was write books. It took a while. I had my first series picked up by HarperCollins Children's Books in 2007. When I was kind of 30-something, I don't know how old I was, actually 30, thereabouts. And that was a horror series called Invisible Fiends. It was actually supposed to be a standalone horror book. I'd written loads of stuff prior to that and never sent it anywhere. And this was the first thing that I thought, right, I actually want to do something with this. It's a story about a boy who, when he's 4, he has an imaginary friend called Mr. Mumbles. And when he's 12, Mr. Mumbles comes back and tries to kill him in a variety of horrible ways. So I sent it to an agent, and they liked it and they wanted to represent it. And they sent it to one publisher. They sent it to HarperCollins. And a few months after they sent it, HarperCollins came back and said, could you do a series of 6 books? And I went, yep. And they said, great, can you give us the outlines for the next 5 by 2 o'clock this afternoon? We have an editorial meeting about it. So I went, this was kind of like 11 o'clock in the morning, so I went, yep. And I hammered out 5 very short kind of single paragraph outlines of the next few books. So HarperCollins took that on. I wrote a few more books for HarperCollins. I've written over 140 books for kids over kind of 10 years. Most under my own name. Well, about half and half under my own name, and some under pen names. And I wrote there was a cartoon series Ben 10. I wrote all the books based on that. I wrote books based on the Skylanders video game series and various other things. I'm down as having co-written a non-fiction book with Roald Dahl, according to the British Library, despite the fact he died many years before I started writing. So I've done a lot of stuff in that regard. None of it, unfortunately, really paid much money. So, like most children's authors, I tended to make most of my money from doing school visits. So you would go into schools, you would deliver workshops, you would do festivals, you would do talks there, you would go to libraries, you would do events there. And we're lucky in Scotland that we have the Scottish Book Trust, who will pay a fee for doing that. So most of my money, despite having written all these books for traditional publishers, most of my money came from events. And back in 2016, I was asked to go into a secondary school and talk to kids there about how they could publish their own work. And I had no idea whatsoever how kids could publish their own work. As far as I was concerned, you typed a book in Word, you emailed it to an editor in London, and 1 to 2 years later, a book arrived in the post. And that was my entire understanding of the process. So I set about kind of teaching myself. I thought I'll go and teach them how to self-publish on Kindle, which I had never really tried before. So I thought I better teach myself how to do it first. I did a little short serial thing, which I dabbled in. I tried, called The Bug. And then I thought I'm going to publish a novel, and it was the first Space Team book. I wrote the book in about 3 weeks. It was really just an experiment, as I say. It wasn't. I didn't write it as a book. I wrote it as part of an experiment in self-publishing. I published it, and almost immediately it started outselling all my traditionally published books combined. So I thought, there's potential here. And I then, there are now 12 books in the Space Team series, 3 spin-offs, collection of short stories, 12 audiobooks, and merchandise available, and a kind of big fan base, really dedicated, insane fan base for Space Team. So, and that all came about from wanting to do this kind of workshop in schools. So that's basically kind of brings us up to today. Last year I thought I would try again and start from scratch, kind of putting in place what I already knew. And I wrote the J.D. Kirk crime series books. First one came out in May last year, so almost a year ago. And those kind of outsell my Space Team books 10, 20 to 1. Those are going fantastic. They've been #1 in various Amazon stores. They've been doing really well.
That is amazing. I don't know which part to ask you about first. I absolutely adore that story from your childhood with that woman. I mean, what a hero she is to have fostered.
She's even more of a hero than that, actually, because prior to that, I didn't read books. I read comics, and my teacher in school, in primary school, hated the fact that I read comics. And we went into the library when the new librarian started. My teacher tried to kind of ridicule me and got all the kids to stand up and say what kind of books they like reading. And then she made me stand up and tried to kind of ridicule me for liking comics. And that librarian, Mrs. McIntyre, said, "Wait there a minute." And she went through the back, and she came back out with this massive stack of comics.
Oh.
Like the Beano, the Dandy, and everything, and Spider-Man and the Hulk, everything. There was just this amazing kind of just stack of joy she brought out, and she dumped it down in front of me and said, "There you go, then read those." And I went into the library every day and read comics, and then she started getting me to read books as well. She went, "Oh, you like that comic? Try this book." So she was amazing woman. And I now write for the Beano as well. So
no way! Oh my goodness me!
I put that down to her.
Yeah, that is amazing. Gosh, she needs like a more goose pimply, because she literally helped shape your entire life.
Literally changed the entire course of my life, I would say, yeah.
So I wrote down, I loosely knew that you did children's books, but I didn't realise the number or volume of them that you've done. So, selfishly, what age range are those kids' books for?
I've covered every age range, really. I've done one picture book, which is really difficult to do picture books. My hats off to anyone who can write picture books. Done one of those, but I've written books for all ages, really. So let me think what series. There's Night of the Living Ted, which is about evil teddy bears that come to life. That's kind of 5 to 7 year old thereabouts, 5 to 8. There's the Shark-Headed Bear Thing series, which is about the same sort of age range. There's Spectre Collectors, which is comedy, horror, sci-fi type stuff, and that's kind of 9 to 12. There's the Invisible Fiends horror series, that's sort of 9 to 12. The 13th Horseman and the Book of Doom, which are comedy fantasy, which are kind of teenage books. So, yeah, cover the whole age range, really.
I'm in a strange situation where my son is only 6, or he's 6.5 now, but he reads like an 8 or 9 year old. But very typical of an author's child. But the issue is because he is definitely 6 mentally, like in terms of his, social and his understanding of, I guess, complex topics, but his ability to read is so far above that. We're finding it very difficult to keep him engaged in stories because lots of the ones that are for his age range are boring. Like, with all respect to Biff, Chip and Kipper, who, teach every child probably on the planet to read, they are not the most engaging of books. No, and
definitely
so
try the Night of the Living Ted series.
Yeah, I've just written that down.
Designed for that sort of reader, really, because my daughter was the same. She was, when I was writing them, she was about that same sort of age 6 or so, but she was reading at 9-10 year old level. Try those.
Yeah, so we've just started City of Ghosts, I think it is, which is set in Edinburgh, but by V. E. Schwab, which is definitely a middle grade, and he can read it all, but I think the concepts are... Yeah, I'm not sure how much he's engaged in it, but okay, so I will. I'm totally going to go and do that. Okay, so back to the topic now. I've finished being selfish. So I've already mentioned that I heard you talking about bootstrapping your business, and in particular the marketing. I think it was Runnymede where I heard you talk about that. So can you tell listeners about the main principles of bootstrapping? What are they getting themselves into if they want to bootstrap their business or their marketing?
Well, basically, it was a necessity for me because being a children's author, like I say, I had no money whatsoever. So I wanted to put Space Team out for no money, basically, and I wanted to, because I was going to be teaching kids how to do this. Kids have no money to spend on marketing, no marketing budget if they want to put their work out anywhere. So I thought I need to be able to deliver this workshop in a way that kids can go home, write a book, put it online and sell it without spending any money. So that was kind of the driving force behind it. So the concept of it is self-publishing with no budget. It's how can you take the idea that's in your head and get that selling, not just on Amazon, but selling without spending any money on it. So that's the concept in a nutshell. So it's just the self-publishing for free is the idea.
Okay, and which obviously lots of people, I'm sure, will be like, "What? You can do this for free?"
Yeah, because there's lots of people trying to sell you expensive things. There's and some of them are absolutely worthwhile. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that free is necessarily the way to go. It's certainly not the easiest way to go, because there's always an investment. Now, whether that investment is money or time is up to you. And how much of that is money and how much of it is time. There's a sliding scale. At one end, you have you're outsourcing everything apart from the writing. In some cases, you're even outsourcing the writing. Some publishers or some indie authors are essentially names with ghostwriters producing the content. So that's one end of the scale. The other end of the scale is you are doing literally everything yourself. Mm-hmm. So all kind of 1,001 things you need to do as a publisher, you are doing yourself. So while you're not spending the money on that, you have to put in the time. You have to spend the time to do it. Now, when I was doing Space Team, I have quite limited Photoshop skills. I know how Photoshop works. I know how to cut things out that looks decent, so it doesn't have a halo around it and all. So I know I'm competent with Photoshop, but I had no idea what made a good book cover. So rather than just jump in and go, I'm going to design my cover now, I spent a few weeks looking at cover design kind of articles on. I googled them. I looked at Facebook groups where people were sharing their covers, and I was seeing the feedback. Keyboards was the thing then. I don't even know if it still is, but people were sharing covers on there and were critiquing. So I was looking at what those critiques said, and I was taking on board all that advice. So before I had even started trying to design my cover, I had invested weeks of my time in learning the principles of cover design. And then the first cover for Space Team, or the cover for the first Space Team book, I think I went through 10 different versions or so. And I was constantly bringing them to groups and bringing them to keyboards and saying, right, what's your feedback on this? And inviting people to be brutal, because there's no point in people going, oh, that's really nice, well done, and you put out a substandard product. I wanted people to be utterly ruthless in telling me what was wrong with it. And then I could then go and try and correct it. And then I would go back and they would say, no, you made it worse, or you haven't taken that on board at all. And I would go back and I would try again. So I went through multiple versions. Those 10 drafts or 10 different covers, like I say, there were in reality 100 different versions, because some were just tweaked slightly, but there were 10 full designs, I would say. So I put the time in, and that's really important. You can't go, great, I can do it for free. I'll knock together a cover in an hour. I'll stick it up. I'll self-edit without any, knowledge of how to do so. You have to learn it, and that's the bit that people find difficult. They think, great, I can publish for free, but you're not publishing for free. You're investing the time that you would otherwise pay for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is why this industry isn't for everybody. Not everybody wants to learn all of these things. Not everybody wants to, invest that much time. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what industry or career you're in. If you want to make it a success, you're looking, don't they say it's every overnight success is 10 years in the making or something,
yeah.
And that's exactly the same here. If you want to bootstrap, then that's fine. You can do everything for free, but you will have to expend that free in time. So it's not really, nothing is really ever for free. It's just what kind of currency you want to spend. Do you want to spend time currency or monetary currency?
Absolutely. And if I was to look at it as the amount of time that I spent, if I was to look at having paid myself even minimum wage in that time, that's thousands of pounds that would have cost. So I spent thousands of pounds worth of time learning all this stuff.
Yeah, but see, for me, I get really excited by that, because I'm like, I want to know all of the things, and I want to learn all of the things.
That's it, yeah. I think that's the beauty of the kind of indie publishing industry, though, is you can do that. You can go as far into it as you want. I'm now in a position that it makes more sense for me to outsource most things. So I outsource cover design, I outsource editing, and all that stuff. But I really enjoy doing it. So sometimes I like to I'll do a mock-up of the cover and go, okay, this is what I want. Do that, but better. And then I'll give it to someone, and they'll come back and they'll have made an amazing version of the kind of the rough draft that I did.
Yeah.
So I like keeping my hand in that way. And sometimes I'll just say, surprise me, do something a bit like this, and then they'll come back with something amazing. Now, what I was fortunate in was that, having been an author, a full-time author for 10 years, I understand story structure. I've worked with dozens of editors from some of the biggest publishing companies in the world, so I understand what works in a story and what doesn't. So I had that advantage going in, that when it came to the kind of editing part, I could be quite brutal. I could go, okay, I know this doesn't work, I know that does work, and I know. So that comes from experience. So again, that's a difficult thing. That's something that people have to accept. The first book they put out will not be the best book they will ever write. Every book I write is better than the one before in some regard, because practice makes perfect, and every book is practice for the next one.
Yeah.
I look back at some of those early HarperCollins books, which I'm kind of reading to my daughter now, I cringe at some of them, and it's just practice. It's all it is.
Yeah, I'm nodding along so much here because I am like a super craft geek. So I read a lot of nonfiction about story, about prose, about every aspect of the craft, and I'm actually, funnily enough, struggling to finish my first young adult series because I look at the first book and I'm like, there's so much wrong with it that I want to fix.
Everyone does that.
Yeah. Okay, so what mistakes do you see writers making when trying to bootstrap?
I think it's that rushing in thing. I think it's the idea that going, great, I can do this for free. I'll have a book up this afternoon, and it's just not possible. You have to, like I say, put the time in. And take feedback, take criticism, invite it. There's no point being precious about this. You're putting yourself out into the world. And when people read your book on Amazon, or wherever they choose to read it, they will be brutal. They will be. Some of those reviews you get will be horrendous. I've had some awful reviews, and you can insulate yourself to that by doing as much as possible now to put the best possible product out there.
Absolutely.
There's a school of thought that you put that minimum viable product and you put something out that's okay. And a lot of authors do that. A lot of authors make a lot of money doing that, and that's absolutely fine. You just have to choose where your kind of line is. You go, okay, what I'm aiming for is, am I aiming for the greatest book ever written? In which case, you will never publish a book because you will never reach that level of perfection. Or are you looking for something that doesn't have any spelling mistakes, which is a much farther down the line sort of line to draw? I can aim somewhere between there, and I'm going for, I want to write the best possible book I can, given these constraints. And these constraints are, I want to put out X number of books in a year. So I know that I have X number of weeks or X number of months to write that book. Mm-hmm. And in that time, I aim to write the best possible book I can. So, but that takes time. So it is that the big problem I see is people rushing in, or the opposite, like I said, people going, I'm not going to put this book out until it is absolutely perfect. And no book is ever perfect. Nope. One of my books that was published through HarperCollins, now I say one of the top 5 publishers in the world, I got it back, I got the final copies about 6 days before I was due to a launch event, to which loads of people and press had been invited to. I was looking through the copies arrived on a Friday night, and I was like, it was always exciting getting a new book. And I flicked through and I realised that the top half of page 13 was on page 14 and vice versa.
Oh no.
And every apostrophe had been replaced with double quotation marks. Someone had done a weird find and replace at some point, and had replaced all the apostrophes with double quotation marks. So I managed to get hold of someone at HarperCollins through Facebook, because no one was in the office. And they said, okay, well, there's an emergency print run. We're going to pulp 13,000 copies. Do an emergency print run. And they said, I'll be with you in 3 days. 3 days later, no books had arrived. And they said, yeah, there's been a hold up. We're going to get you to them in time for the launch event. They're going to deliver them directly to the launch event. So 5 minutes before the launch event, still no books. And I'm going, oh, this is a disaster, And then this box arrived and the books turned up. And we opened them up and they were the 3rd edition. And we later found out that they had pulped 13,000 copies, reprinted 13,000 copies from the same file with the same errors in it, pulped all those, and then printed 30,000 more. So yeah, these mistakes can happen. So no book is ever perfect. Hopefully, it won't be as bad as that. But yeah, it's choosing your level of kind of acceptable quality. I think people should strive for the best possible book they can. But you've got to accept that perfection isn't possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was having a conversation very similar to that over the weekend, or maybe it was last week, because I slowed right down my publishing, but this year I'm trying to speed back up, and part of it is because I want to put out the best book I'm capable of putting out, but that doesn't mean that it's a perfect book. It's not going to be a perfect book. It's just the best of my ability, which invariably means I write a bit slower than other people, but that's tough. I'm happier putting out something that I am proud of than I am accepting a slightly lower quality book. But that's not to say that lower quality, quality is in the eye of the reader at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And no matter how good that book is now, I guarantee you that in 5 years' time you will look back at it and go, oh God, that's terrible. Oh, I should change that. Why did I put that in? Because that's what we do. We get better. That's
exactly.
So and if you don't write the books, you don't get better.
No, exactly. And almost if you don't look back in 5 years and go, oh God, I could have done this or that better, then you're not developing or progressing.
You're just treading water. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so let's look specifically at the marketing end. What practical things can authors do in the run up to a launch in order to save themselves marketing spend?
Well, I can really only speak from what I did, and what I did was because I went into a lot of kind of indie author groups, the 20 books group. I think we only had about 300 people in it when I joined the 20 books to 50k group. It was tiny. I'd seen Michael Anderle post on Keyboards and saying check out this group, and I thought, oh, I'll have a look. And I went on, and there were a lot of people there who knew a lot about indie publishing, and I hadn't published my first book then, so I knew nothing about indie publishing. But I like to be helpful, so I went on, and people who were asking questions about craft, I knew I could help out with those. I could answer those because I had been at that point, full-time author for 10 years, so I could help with those. I could give feedback on kind of snippets from books people had posted. I helped to proofread some stuff. I gave feedback on covers just based on my personal preference. And I got involved, and I tried to, not in any kind of calculating way, but I tried to help as many people as possible because I was getting a lot from the group. I was learning a lot of information about indie publishing, and I tried to give back as much as I could with what little I knew, what little relevant, useful stuff I knew. So by doing that, what I later discovered, and when people had new books out, I would share them on my Facebook page. I would say, look, here's a new thing, check this out, this is all very exciting. And what I found was, when it got to the stage that I was ready to put stuff out, everyone I had helped, or everyone who had seen me helping people, were really keen to help me too. And they had a much bigger reach than I had. So my first book went out, and Michael Anderle shared it to his newsletter, his mailing list, So that was good. So just by being helpful, just by being kind of personable and doing what I could to help people out, they were really keen to help me out. So that gave me a big boost. I'd also learned at the time, and listening to podcasts at the time and reading up, they all stressed the mailing list. And it still seems to be the case. I still find, I started building a mailing list by giving some stuff away. I'd written some short stories that were based on my kind of traditional published stuff, so I gave those away, and I gave away just various little short bits and bobs that I had written, and tried to build up a mailing list that way. And I built up a kind of small mailing list of maybe, I think before I launched, kind of like 300, 400 people. And then I had a magnet at the back when the first book came out, and that was giving away a free short story. And I was using MailChimp at that point, so I had 2,000 free, or the count gives you 2,000 subscribers free or thereabouts. So again, that was costing me nothing at all. I'd written something, I gave it away for free, and I built a mailing list through that. I did the same with the J.D. Kirk stuff, because I wanted to kind of bootstrap that as well, just to see if I could do it again. And I couldn't be bothered. It was sheer laziness. I couldn't be bothered writing a reader magnet, writing a short story, because I had so much other stuff I was juggling at that point. So I thought, what else can I give away? And the J.D. Kirk books are set in the Highlands, where I live. So I created a photo gallery of locations from the first book. And it's just pictures of kind of the area. So stuff that I'd taken most of them already. I went out and took a few of the kind of local police station and stuff like that, and I put this gallery out and linked to that in the back of the book. And I've got thousands of subscribers from people who just wanted to look at some nice photos. So there are things you can do that aren't necessarily a huge burden on your time. Like, you don't have to write a reader magnet. I mean, people will definitely thank you for it. and I intend to do a short story set in that world at some point. But there are other things you can give away to lure people into your mailing list. So building mailing list is key, I would say, and just being nice to people. I think one of my key points in the presentation at 20 Books London was don't be a dick, and just if you just make yourself helpful, people will naturally want to help you too.
Absolutely.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does. I think
because I forgot what the question was about halfway through, and I just kept talking in the hope that I would answer something.
So the question was, what practical things can authors do in the run up to a launch to save? Marketing.
So yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Ask, yeah. I did well then.
And the marketing, sorry, I'm smashing my mic around. The mailing list is so important, and this is definitely something that I need to work on for my fiction in the next quarter, because I have reader magnets for my non-fiction, but I've never done it, and I have stuff I can use. I'm just being silly and resistant. But anyway, okay, how can you find readers without spending money on expensive Facebook ads?
Well, Facebook first and foremost is not an advertising network; it's a social network. So it's finding a way to reach out to people without being a dick. Because no one wants to be sold to by their friends necessarily. But you may find that you're already in groups. There are lots of sci-fi authors who are already in science fiction related groups, or which sometimes have thousands, tens of thousands of members. And if they're already active in those, and those are a perfect place to kind of, depending on the rules of that group, obviously, but to kind of mention the fact that you've done this thing that might be of interest to people. So I think once you find a few fans, it's much easier. So if you can find a small group of people that you think will like your book, if you can give them the book for free, if you can, you're building up that kind of street team type thing where people will do your selling for you almost. And I don't want to suggest this in a kind of in a way of flouting rules of certain groups, but you can't self-promote. But if you have a group of people who genuinely enjoy your books, there is nothing to stop them promoting your books in groups. So I don't want to say that in a kind of cynical, convince people to go and sell your stuff kind of way. But if you can get readers genuinely excited, and all you need is a small group of genuinely excited people who can help spread the word around on social media, you can gently encourage them to do so. That's not against the rules. Unlike Amazon, you obviously can't encourage them to review your book, but there's no harm in saying, if you've enjoyed this, go and tell your friends on Facebook. Go and go to my page on Facebook, share this link, whatever it may be. So it's finding that small group of dedicated fans, and they may already be in groups that you frequent. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend. I'd say look at the groups you're already in, look at the people you're already interacting with on Facebook, and see if some of those would appreciate, especially given that we have a lot of time on our hands at the moment, if they would appreciate reading your book for free. And then using that, because that giving away, to start with, I was really resentful because I'm Scottish and I'm very tight with money. The idea of giving anything away to people for free went against my bare nature. It didn't seem to make sense to go, well, these are potential readers, and I'm giving away 20 copies of this book. That's potentially 40 quid that could be in my pocket. But if those 20 readers bring in 1,000 readers, and 20 readers is nothing. There are millions of readers on Amazon. Those are the ones you want to reach. And if giving away to those 20, giving away to those to 50, giving away to 100 people helps you reach, thousands of readers, then it makes complete sense. So it's don't be afraid to give stuff away. Especially at this stage in Space Team, there are 12 books in the series. There are 3 spin-offs, short story collections. So I can afford to give stuff away for free in the hope that people go, I'm going to read the next 11, or whatever it may be. So yeah, don't be afraid to give stuff away for free. It's a great way to get people onto your mailing list. Like I say, if you give them your book for free, get them signed up, but just giving it away and getting it out there into the world. And the more it's out there in the world, the more it will spread. like a certain virus which is causing us problems at the moment. But yeah, the more you can put it out there, the more other people will pick up on it. Get those excited fans to start talking about it. That's what I would recommend.
Amazing. Are there any tools or resources you particularly like or have used that have saved you money?
I found recently an alternative to Evernote. I was subscribed to Evernote for a few years. I think it was costing like £100 a year or something. But there's an open source alternative called Joplin, Joplin, which is excellent, which does, and you can even import all your notes from Evernote. There's like an importer, and it's fantastic. Really enjoy that. There's another free bit of software called Notion, Notion. I think it's Notion.io possibly is the website. But that's great. I use that for organising pretty much everything now. You can create dashboards, you can use it for taking notes, you can make a little wiki, you can do whatever you want with it. It's an incredible bit of software. And Trello as well. I tend to plan out my stories in Trello and use them. Oh, actually, I found an amazing bit of software recently. I got a big whiteboard and I got post-it notes for I don't tend to plan the space team stuff very much. It's almost stream of consciousness type stuff. But the J.D. Kirk books, because it's a crime, I have to know who done it at the start, so I can see the clues through. So I got a big whiteboard and I got post-it notes and I put post-its up. But there's a post-it app, and you take a picture and it identifies where your post-it notes are, and then you can use the app to move them around. You take a virtual whiteboard of that and you can just move the notes around and do all that stuff. And it's free,
my God.
It's amazing. So I have a big whiteboard in the office. I take a picture and then I can take it all out because I've got the post-it app and I can just zoom in and move around and add more notes and tag them and all sorts of stuff.
So what is that piece of heaven called?
What was that?
What is that piece of heaven called?
It's just called, I think, just look on the App Store, just Post-it, Post-it. It's an official Post-it notes app. Brilliant. Amazing.
Oh, my God.
Even more amazingly, you can import from that into Trello. So you can make your Post-it notes, take a picture and import them all into Trello, and it reads your handwriting, converts it into text into a Trello board.
So there is a bit of an on-running joke in one of my Facebook groups about how much of a Post-it queen I am.
There we go, look at that.
I literally Post-it everything. I just had a quick count. I have nearly 20 Post-its around my iMac, just because, I use them on everything, everywhere. And I did not know about this, so you have just brought me a little piece of joy.
Take a picture of that and then move them around virtually.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Oh my God, that's just made my day. Okay, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell me about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Oh God, I don't know if I have an inner rebel. I'm very boring. In terms of indie publishing, one thing I can think of that there's probably a lesson to take from it. I don't know what the lesson is, but there's probably a lesson to take from it somewhere. When I was showing off my Space Team covers, I was determined I wanted to market as comedy science fiction and not just science fiction. And I kind of had a bit of a background in writing comics. And I decided quite early on that there was going to be a speech bubble on the cover for this first Space Team book. It was the only Space Team book that I had planned at that point. And I wanted a speech bubble on it. And everybody that I showed it to on keyboards, everybody that I showed it to on Facebook said, "What are you doing? Take the stupid speech bubble off the cover." And I was determined. I thought, no, I like it. And I listened to every other bit of advice I was given. And I'd taken all that on board. And the speech bubble, I said, no, I'm keeping it. And people got quite angry. People I didn't know were getting quite angry at me keeping the speech bubble on. And I decided I was keeping it. I put it out. And the number of reviews, the number of people who contacted me said what drew my eye was the speech bubble on the cover.
No way.
And then what happened was in the kind of months that followed, in fact, the months that followed me, because I told this story at Running Week when we were down in London. And I said, the kind of lesson I said was find your thing that makes your book stand out, that makes you all go, oh yeah, that's the one with X or whatever it might be. And a lot of people took that to mean put speech bubbles on your covers, and it made within weeks of Runnymede, and for months afterwards, every kind of comic science fiction book that appeared had a speech bubble on the cover. But they hadn't paid attention to the lessons of learn what you're doing, and to learn how to design a cover. These speech bubbles were, just slapped on, linked to nothing. There was no one speaking. There were just speech bubbles on there. So they'd taken one bit of advice. They'd gone, okay, find what makes your book unique, to mean steal his speech bubble idea and stick that on the covers. But yeah, so everyone said, don't do it, speech bubbles. I said, I'm doing it. And I think it's been pretty instrumental to Space Team's success. The other thing that I'm about to do to unleash my inner rebel is try to kick up a big stink at one of the publishers of some of my earlier books, my traditionally published books. I'm trying to get the rights back, and they're being really stubborn, and I'm now considering doing a big blog post / social media war on how unfair their treatment of authors is. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I love a bit of a big fuck you to the authority, so I will thoroughly enjoy seeing that. Okay, tell listeners where they can find out more about you and your books.
You can find my website is just barryjhutchison.com. That's for the Space Team books. If you go to jdkirk.com, you will find very little information at the moment on the crime fiction. I was designing the JD Kirk website because I like doing that as well. I should outsource that, but I like doing it. So I was designing that just before you called. So the jdkirk.com website will be updated soon. At the moment, it's kind of just a very boring holding page. But yeah, jdkirk.com, barryjhutchison.com. I should stress it is Hutchison. It is not Hutchinson. Everybody puts an N in the middle of the surname. It's not Hutchinson, it's Hutchison. barryjhutchison.com. My publishing company is Zertex Media, Zertex being the villains in the Space Team series. They're like a kind of galactic corporation which does evil, specialises in evil basically, and soft drinks. Zertexmedia.com. You can find information on loads of the stuff that we do.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to all of the patrons who help to support the show and to keep the show running. If you would like to get early access to all of the shows, then you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Barry Hutchison, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I'll be talking to Christina Kay all about how to write a thriller. Join me then, and don't forget to answer this week's question: what is your best cheap or free marketing tip? And last but by no means least, don't forget to go and check out my new podcast, Next Level Authors. Oh, and I lied. One more thing. Don't forget to go and pre-order your copy of The Anatomy of Prose. Stay safe, stay at home, and I'll be back next week. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.